Hello, America. This is the Daily Answer. Your host, Mark Dunagan. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 14, and in verse 34, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. In other words, morality, moral principles, nations that are built on such moral principles are strong nations. When we depart from morality, when we depart from the virtues, it is a disgrace, and it brings corruption and a weakening of any culture. Notice that again. It's a disgrace to any people. There is no group of people out there that can engage in sin, and you know what? They're not any better for it or any worse for it. They're just, neutral. No, sin corrupts everyone. A departure from God would corrupt any nation, and I believe history definitely demonstrates the principle of Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 34. In my lifetime, living in this great country, in America, I've seen a number of social experiments that the culture has run. And one of the first ones in my lifetime was the whole idea of sex before marriage. Is that, hey, this kind of loosen up there. It's not a big deal. Everyone does it. Might be good for people to live together before they get married. They can work out their differences. Might be good for people to be intimate before marriage because, hey, you wouldn't buy a car unless you test drove it, right? And all of that sort of human reasoning. And the theory was that if people were intimate before marriage, if people lived together before marriage, that would kind of weed out anyone marrying the wrong person, and that would kind of lower the divorce rate, and that would make better marriages. That's the human wisdom behind all of that. The argument was that that you can be intimate with someone and it remained a very casual, no strings attached sort of situation. Interestingly, the Bible addresses that. Now, in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, it says, flee immorality. And the immorality here is flee fornication. And that's not a word a whole lot of people like. What's fornication? Fornication is sex outside of marriage. Fornication is all unlawful sexual relations, and it's those that are outside of marriage. Okay, all right. A lot of people are going like, "Oop, boy, someone needs to tell people about that." Why flee? God loves us. God is the creator. God has given us such a beautiful planet to live upon, and we are just amazing creatures that God has created, and all good gifts come from him. And so why would he say sex outside of marriage? No. That's off limits. That's fornication. That's immorality. Well, take a look at verse 16 of 1 Corinthians. Or do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says the two shall become one flesh. Looks like the Corinthians, if I can read between the lines here, looks like the Corinthians were making an argument that they could go to the temple there, to the pagan temple in town where there were prostitutes, and they could engage in the services offered by those prostitutes. And since there was no love involved and no commitment involved, and it was just their body, and almost like it's just a bodily function, it's like eating or going to the bathroom. Okay. Well, I hope your intimate relationship is not like going to the bathroom. I hope it's better than that. But it looks like they were just trying to argue that whatever they did with their body was inconsequential as far as in relationship to their soul. Kind of like when someone naively says, my personal life doesn't have anything to do with my faith. And it seems like there's that thinking going on, is that I can go into this woman. I'm not making a commitment to her. I don't love her. She's not making a commitment to me. And we can engage in intimate physical behavior and no strings are attached. Whoa, slow down, Bucky. Because in verse 16, It uses the language of Genesis. Is that, and it doesn't mean that you're married. It doesn't mean that if you go into the prostitute, bam, you're automatically married to her. But the language used in the garden about a man leaving father and mother and cleaving to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, is used of that relationship. Doesn't mean you're married, but what it means is this: is that strings are being attached whether you recognize that or not. That you have just given that prostitute, or you've just given that person in the one night stand, you've just given them a piece of yourself. You've just given them a piece of your heart. And you are not the same person you were before that. And whether you recognize it or not at the moment, all sorts of strings, all sorts of things beneath the surface are getting attached. One of the great dangers of having sex before marriage is that you you you're the danger is you're going to end up marrying somebody you should not marry, because once that physical intimacy takes place, you might say objectivity goes out the window for a while. And now it's feeling. And feelings are great liars. Proverbs 16:25. There's a way that seems right to a man, and the end is death. Well, I don't know how many people I've run into that later on were having marriage problems, and I think I married the wrong person, but it comes out, yeah, we had sex before we married. And what that does is that kind of solidifies things when they should not be solidified. That automatically brings you for a moment closer together, and the reality is that you're not that close together, but you feel close together. Strings are being attached whether you recognize it or not. I wanted to deal a little bit with the whole idea of like living together prepares you for marriage. No, people are not dumb. The reason that people live together is because it's not marriage. It's not the commitment of marriage. People understand the difference between living together and marriage. They get it. The reason they have not married yet is they understand a huge difference between their living together relationship and marriage. I know some foolish people say, well, a piece of paper won't make me love you anymore. Well, then why not sign it? Why not do it? Okay. The reason you're not doing it is because you understand it is far more than just a piece of paper. Time to come clean. Time to own up and stop lying and tell the truth and say, um, I don't want the commitment. And I'm using you. I'm using you. Maybe you're using me. And we're not completely committed to one another. I want to keep my options open. I want to keep the back door open in case I want to go, in case I find something better up ahead. Also wanted to deal with the argument of, comparing intimacy and intimacy between a man and a woman to like test driving a car, which I think is a horrible. Women should be insulted by that. If a man says that, you need to smack him. You should just be insulted that anyone would be that shallow to put the physical love between a man and a woman on the same level of test driving a car. Number one, your relationship to a car is not a real relationship. I mean, the car's doing all the work. It has the motor, it has the transmission, etc. And you just got brake, steering wheel, and gas. That's it, okay? And if the car lacks performance, it's it's the car. But in intimacy between a man and a woman, it takes two. It takes two to make that work. And if you walk away from being with a man or woman and going like, I don't know, wasn't that great? Whoa, 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 whoa. You were involved there. If it wasn't that great, you're probably part of the problem. You just can't pin it all on them. How arrogant. How arrogant to think that if you come together for some physical intimacy with a person and then you walk away complaining about it, that's all on them? No. That would be like a cook a cook with a recipe and ingredients complaining about the outcome, like, I had these ingredients and had this recipe, but you know what? It must have been the fault of the ingredients. No, man, you're involved. It's your fault too. You're in on that. And just what a horrible comparison of taking the amazing love between a man and a woman and comparing it to test driving an automobile. Wow, time to wake up and grow up on that one. The reason that God is not against intimacy, God is not against sexual intimacy. The reason he placed it in marriage is because it is so powerful that that's the only relationship that can contain it. Because because the sexual force can be so constructive, it can bring men and women closer together. The two should become one flesh. Or it can blow society apart. It can blow families apart, like when adultery comes in. It can blow marriages apart. It, 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 it can blow a civilization apart. If you don't believe that, study history. What happens? What happens when families start breaking down? What happens when kids start growing up without a dad? What happens? What happens in the culture? That culture doesn't last long. It's incredibly destructive. The commitment of marriage is the only, you might say, vessel that can keep the sexual relationship constructive and not destructive. Outside of marriage, it will become selfish and it will become a destructive force like a fire that would just consume lots of other things around it. Okay. Now, the second social experiment I saw within my lifetime was the no fault divorce. And the thinking at the time is that, we have these couples that are not happy and the kids are hearing them argue. Better to just let them go their separate ways, and mom will find someone, dad will find someone, and the kids will be happier. The kids would rather have mom and dad separated than, arguing together in the home. And that was one of the basic premises of kind of the whole no fault divorce. And to me, it's laughable that they call it no fault. Then why are we ending the marriage if it's nobody's fault? It has to be somebody's fault. I mean, if we can't live together anymore, if we can't stay married together anymore, it has to be somebody's fault. It just can't be no fault. And I think that's we would have called that a cop-out back in the 60s. I hate divorce, 16. Malachi chapter 2, verse 16. And you might say, well, why? It's always good to ask the question, why? Oh, if God says he hates something, why? There must be a reason for that. Remember back in way back in Genesis, in the very beginning instruction, a man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two should become one flesh. The reason that God hates divorce is because divorce separates the most basic foundational component of society, the home. Mom, dad, the kids. Why is that so important? Because the next generation is being raised in that relationship. Well, and why is that important? Because the next generation is civilization. That's why. If the next generation does not grow up with a healthy environment, mom, dad, the kids, and male leadership, and a mom taking care of them, and some stability there, well, who knows what's going to show up? It could be that the people that show up don't want to work and don't want to be involved and want to do as little as possible and simply want to live for themselves. Or the people that show up are so messed up, they can't help themselves and they can't help anybody else. And when you get to that point, you're looking at a serious decline of whatever civilization you happen to be in. And it's interesting, when that social experiment was run, you see, there's always unintended consequences. There's man's wisdom never sees all the fallout. Man's wisdom never sees all the consequences. Man's wisdom never anticipates that. And when those consequences show up, guess what? Who's there? Who's there to help pick up the pieces? Well, not the world, not society, not unbelievers. You know who's there to pick up the pieces? Churches. That's who's there. Because when people show up and say, hey, I was advised to do this and I've messed up my life. Well, the world says, well, you're not interesting anymore for us. We've moved on to the next social experiment. And it's God's people that are left helping people pick up the pieces and helping people recover from being encouraged to run that very foolish and dangerous social experiment in their own lives. And I went through that. I went through the 70s, late 60s, 70s, when really divorce started just mowing through the culture. I remember, I think between my junior and senior year of high school, when I came back during my senior year, it seems like all the teachers, or a good portion of the teachers, are married to someone differently than they'd been married to the year before. And I also remember in the job I had and in the neighborhood I lived in, there were women that got this idea that there were, if they could just be single again, there was a line of men out there waiting to date them. I think our neighbor lady felt that, and some of the ladies at the grocery store that I worked in years ago, kind of this idea, boy, you know what? If I got back on the market again, there would be a line of men waiting to date me. Guess what? Yeah, they divorced their husbands, and there was not a line of men waiting to date them. And some of those women remain single until their death. This idea like, boy, someone's going to appreciate me now, and the devil really can pull a number on you, thinking that you're the deal, and you don't see your own faults. You don't see your own shortcomings. All I can tell is that in many cases, what divorce did, it created a lot of messed up kids, where kids were shuttled. You're not going to raise your kids after you divorce. You're just going to shuttle them from one parent to another. And I really feel sorry for the people out there that your mate cheated on you. They're unrepentant. Man, you have no choice. You're going to have to put them away. And it's not going to be easy. You can raise good kids, but it's definitely not going to be easy. Also, divorce doesn't answer a whole lot of problems. You're forever tied to that other person. You can not be married any longer, but if there's kids involved, you can't live. You have to live kind of within driving distance to them to shuttle the kids. You can't move out of state. A lot of your life is tied to their life forever. There's always one piece of paper or something else that still has to be signed, or you need to get their okay on, or whatever. You're kind of tied to them legally forever, whether you like it or not. So be very careful who you marry. Also, divorce put a lot of women and children in poverty. It also put a lot of men in poverty. I run into men that their wives left them. There are kids, there's child support, and those men are now living in their parents' basements because they can't afford to pay 2 mortgages and to take care of 2 households. And so there they are, forever financially shackled for a long time to this other individual. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we run another social experiment, would someone just be honest enough to say, oh, by the way, the ones that we previously ran were abject failures? Would someone apologize? Would someone say, we're sorry, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. God was right after all. We're sorry. Can we just hear that before we run another social experiment? This is Mark Dunagan for the Daily Answer. Until next time, we'll see you in the funny papers.